not here?
Not for the
Gerald
judge.
Salente.
Oh my gosh.
But it is a real pleasure to introduce a man who needs no introduction. He's a board member of the Ron Paul Institute. When we first asked him, he said yes immediately. This is, believe it or not, this is his first appearance at a Ron Paul Institute conference, and we are overjoyed and thrilled to have Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Ron stood up.
Thank you, my dear friends. The first time I met Ron Paul, I was speaking to a group about this size, and he was in the audience, and I didn't know it. And when I made eye contact with him, my knees buckled. I said of him then what I will say of him now. He is the Thomas Jefferson of our age. His son, Senator Rand Paul, asked me to testify before the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs against a bipartisan proposal to expand the president's war powers. Expand them. The president has no war powers under the Constitution. Congress declares war. So I was there basically to give this committee a lecture on the separation of powers. The legislative branch writes the laws, the president enforces the laws, the judiciary interprets the laws, and they don't trade their powers among themselves. A senator not on the committee who inexplicably claimed he had never seen me on Fox showed up to grill me expecting the sort of Donald Trump, Dick Cheney, George Bush, muscular foreign policy to come out of my mouth. When I finished, he called me up and said the following. See if you can guess who this is at my efforts to imitate his voice. So, Judge Napolitano, let me ask you this. Still employed by Fox News after that performance? And then, Bernie Sanders kissed me. So I called the president of Fox immediately. What happened? Bernie Sanders kissed me. What did you do? I testified before the Senate committee. What did you testify about? The separation of powers. Oh my God, what's that? No, it's a very good thing. Why are you calling me? Because there's this picture of Bernie kissing me, and your PR department's going to have to deal with it. I think you better come back to New York. You're causing too many problems in D.C. Government depends on make-believe. Make-believe the king is divine. Make-believe he can do no wrong. Make-believe the voice of the people is the voice of God. Make-believe the people have a voice. Make-believe that the representatives of the people are the people. Make-believe that all men are created equal. Make-believe that they're not. Make-believe that we have a Constitution. The Constitution was ratified in 1789. It would not have been ratified but for the promise to add a Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments, which were added 2 years later in 1791. The scrivener at the Constitutional Convention is James Madison, and he's also the author of the Bill of Rights. We all know what's in the Bill of Rights. Your right to think as you wish, to say what you think, to publish what you say, to associate with whomever you want, not to associate with whomever you want, to worship or not to worship, your right to keep and bear arms to defend yourself, which is not the right to shoot deer, it's the right to shoot tyrants. And that quintessentially American right, the right to be left alone. All of these rights are added to the Constitution, so it serves two purposes. One, to establish the federal government, and two, to limit it. The first purpose has flourished maniacally. The second purpose has been a dismal failure. I've been defending the Constitution for 45 years. It is obvious that as an instrument of restraint on the federal government, it has failed. And the failure began just 7 years after the Bill of Rights was added. My friend and colleague, Professor Turley, alluded to the Alien and Sedition Acts. So in 1798, under the presidency of John Adams, his vice president was Thomas Jefferson, and they didn't speak. Well, why didn't they speak? Remember, in those days, everybody ran for president. Whoever finished first was president. Whoever finished second was vice president. This is inconceivable in the modern era. Donald, bring me a cup of coffee. Hillary, I need more sugar in my tea. I mean, this is simply inconceivable in the modern era. Of course, it was changed by the 12th Amendment. But in the presidency of John Adams, there spread through the country something that is inconceivable today: fear of the French. Well, the French had just cut off the king's head, and Adams was worried that Jefferson and his buddies might do the same thing to him. So they enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts, the enactment of which resonates to this very day. The Alien and Sedition Acts basically said, come to the United States, the federal government will give you 20 acres of land that it stole from somebody. Work on the land for 5 years, you can own the land and you become an American citizen, unless you're French, in which case you have to wait 14 years before you can become an American citizen. And by the way, whoever shall speak calumny or untruths about the president or the government shall be guilty of a felony punishable by 2 years in a federal prison. So the same generation, in some cases the very same human beings who had written and ratified in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, a mere 7 years later enacted a statute abridging the freedom of speech. A congressman from Vermont by the name of Matthew Lyons, who was the Thomas Massey of his day, decided to challenge the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, John Adams had a problem that to this day afflicts a lot of middle-aged men: a growing waistline. So his wife sewed a purple robe for him to wear covering the waistline, and she didn't like the way the purple looked, so she put gold epaulets on the shoulders. And one day the president and his entourage are walking in Washington, D.C., and Congressman Lyons comes up to him and says, "Good morning, President Calamity." That didn't get very far. A week later he goes up and says, "Good morning, President Pomposity." Well, that didn't get him indicted. And then he decides to really go for the jugular and says, "Good morning, President Rotundity." And for that, Congressman Lyons was indicted and prosecuted under the Alien and Sedition Acts for demeaning the character and speaking an untruth about the President of the United States. He was tried by a jury in Boston. He was convicted and served 2 years in a federal prison. All of this notwithstanding the First Amendment. While he was in jail, he did something which, if you are from New Orleans, Hudson County, New Jersey, or Boston, you are familiar with. He ran for re-election from his jail cell, and he won. When he got out of jail, he returns triumphantly to Washington, D.C., expecting to thumb his nose at his rotundity, only to find in the White House the tall, slender, red-haired hero of his, Thomas Jefferson, who proceeds to pardon him and to return the 420 acres of land that the federal government had seized from him because he mocked the president's waistline. What is it about government? A brand new government, writing as if It stands for individual liberty, crushing liberty within 7 years of its coming into existence. When the Alien and Sedition Acts passed, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which were actually legislation passed by the Kentucky legislature and the Virginia legislature, declaring the Alien and Sedition Acts unconstitutional in Kentucky and in Virginia. And the threat was, if the federal government attempted to enforce the Alien and Sedition Acts against any Virginian in a court in Virginia, or any Kentuckian in a court in Kentucky, Virginia and Kentucky would secede from the Union. Thus born, or thus articulated, by the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence, and the guy who was the scrivener at the Constitutional Convention and wrote the Bill of Rights, the concept of secession and nullification. Secession died with the war between the states. However, 40 years later, in a Supreme Court opinion involving the state of Texas, the Supreme Court said if a state wants to leave, it would take the consent of 37 others for it to do so. I don't know where they came up with the 37, but it's a number they came up with, at least acknowledging in principle secession. Nullification was revived last week. What happened last week? The state of Texas enacted legislation prohibiting abortions after the onset of a fetal heartbeat at about 6 weeks of gestation. The law of the land, which is Roe versus Wade, allows abortions up to the onset of fetal viability, which is about the 24th week of gestation. I don't know your opinion on abortion. I'm an old-fashioned pre-Vatican II Latin Mass attending Roman Catholic, and to me abortion is homicide. When the abortion providers in Texas challenged the law, a federal judge enjoined its enforcement, and then the Attorney General of Texas appealed back to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which vacated the injunction. And then the abortion providers filed an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, emergency appeals are rarely granted, but they basically argue that the action to be enjoined is so profoundly unlawful or unconstitutional, the evidence in support of it is so overwhelming that the court might as well not even wait for a trial and enjoin the action today. And the Supreme Court, at midnight last Wednesday, in a bitterly divided 5-4 decision, said we're not getting involved. So the Supreme Court of the United States permitted the legislature of the state of Texas to nullify Roe versus Wade. Amen. This is the first federal judicial endorsement of nullification since before the Civil War, when South Carolina attempted to nullify certain federal tariffs that the Congress had imposed. It's just a little bit of a rising of the curtain of where we may see ourselves going. Because the only way to restrain the federal government is to terrify it. And the only way to terrify the federal government is to take away its jurisdiction and its income. And if we can nullify what the federal government does, and the Supreme Court said yes, maybe secession is not too far behind. Do we still have a constitution? So there are two approaches to answer this question. The first is a formal approach. Yes, We have a constitution. It is still there. The government it established persists in the United States of America. But the functional approach, does it effectively restrain the government? The answer, of course, is a profound no. It doesn't restrain the federal government at all. The federal government lies, cheats, steals, kills, regulates whatever it wants, taxes whatever it wants, bullies the states into compliance, obliterates the sovereignty of the states. The government is not even recognizable to those who founded it, which is why Jefferson argued, since the consent of the governed is the linchpin of moral government in a free society. Do you know anyone who has consented to the federal government? No. Have any of you consented to the government? No. Well, if you read the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't make sense without the consent of the governed, which is why Jefferson argued the Constitution and the form of government should be presented to the public for acceptance or rejection at least once in every generation. And if the public doesn't consent, it is their right and their duty to abolish the government to which they don't consent. Why do we permit mayors to issue mandates and governors to issue mandates and the CDC to issue mandates, as Jeff Dice pointed out? A bunch of doctors in Atlanta are going to tell landlords in New York when they can evict tenants for not paying rent? Where is that in the Constitution? It's not in the Constitution. Because even though everyone who works for the government, from a school board janitor to the President of the United States, takes the same oath, I myself have taken this oath several times when I was on the bench in New Jersey, to uphold the Constitution, they merely give it lip service. They just don't take it seriously. Look around this room. It would be hard for you to find almost anything, from the legs on the chairs, to the cotton in the tablecloth, to the power in those light bulbs, to the pigment in the paint on the walls and the ceiling, that is not governed by the feds. Because we have looked the other way, because the attitude of Ron Paul and Thomas Massie doesn't prevail in Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., the government is not one of limited powers, it's one of general powers. To those who run the government in Washington, D.C., they can right any wrong and tax any event and regulate any behavior. The Constitution be damned. I don't know if this is ever going to be changed in my lifetime. But if it is to be changed, it will happen when people individually secede from the government. When people determine in massive and peaceful numbers, we will not listen to you any longer. Can you imagine if everybody in Texas decided we're not going to pay our federal income taxes? Well, the feds don't have the wherewithal to prosecute all those people. The government, which is already bankrupt, would lose a ton of income. The federal judges couldn't be paid. I'm not suggesting you break the law. I'll get in trouble for that. But a mandate to wear a mask, a mandate not to go to mass, a mandate not to go to work, a mandate to close your business. These are not mandates. These are fanciful wishes of dictatorial puppets who think they can tell us how to live. They have no more interest in the Bill of Rights than they do the man in the moon. But unless we resist them, unless we insist on due process, okay, you said I did something wrong, show me the statute I violated, the statute enacted by city council or the state legislature or the Congress, not a rule proposed by a bureaucrat. Because in America, we have the separation of powers. The legislative branch writes the laws. The executive branch enforces them. As I said earlier, they can't trade those powers back and forth. That would violate the principles of the Constitution, about which they couldn't care less. So I think that Jeff Deist is right. People will soon realize that the federal government will fall like an overripe apple. That it won't be able to pay its bills, that its dollars will be worthless, that its mandates will be unenforceable, and the country will break apart into various segments based on geography or based on human freedom. Don't go to the Northeast. There's even less freedom there than there is in Washington, D.C. Jeff talked about people leaving New Jersey. New Jersey's like a communist state. If you sell real estate in New Jersey and buy a home, a principal residence in another state, they tax you $10,000. You have to pay the state of New Jersey for the privilege of leaving. Wait a minute. I thought my right to travel from one state to another was a fundamental natural right, in this case articulated in the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. They don't care. They will punish you from leaving the most overtaxed, overregulated state of the union, and you'll pay the money just to be rid of them. But that money shouldn't be paid. And the dictators should not be listened to. The answer to all of this is personal, public, profound, peaceful resistance. And it doesn't matter which party is elected. I know Dr. Paul ran for Congress as a Republican, and Congressman Massey runs as a Republican. When he invited me to his congressional office, I said, "Ron, this is a broom closet." And he goes, "Well, the offices are given out by the leadership of the party on the basis of those who obey them. And those who challenge them end up with offices like this." And I kissed his hands. Because it's not only takes an understanding of the Constitution, an understanding of our natural rights, which, by the way, the Ninth Amendment requires the government to acknowledge and protect. It takes personal courage. There's very little personal courage in Washington, D.C. I thought it was gone when Ron left. It's there to the nth degree, as you heard in Congressman Massey. Thank God for people like that, because though they lose these votes, they expose the government for the fraud that the government is. Government is essentially the negation of liberty. We are born free. It is our birthright. We're born in the image and likeness of God. As He is perfectly free, we are perfectly free. All the government does is take that freedom away. Which is why we must resist it. Resist it, insist on the consent of the governed, because we have one political party in Congress. It's the big government party. It has a Republican branch that likes war and deficits and regulations, and a Democratic branch that likes war and taxes and regulations, and the two branches will choke our liberty to death if we don't do something about it. Remember Ronald Reagan's warning, the 9 most dangerous words in the English language. I'm here from the government. I'm here to help you. 2 days after the incident with Bernie Sanders, I was driving in my car, and the phone rang, and as Congressman Massey described to you, it was 10 zeros on the dashboard, so I knew who this was. It was the White House operator. Judge Napolitano, please hold for the president. Okay? Mr. President, how are you? Judge, fine, how are you? So, Judge, we have a new pasta chef at the White House. And the other night, Melania and I were eating pasta alone, and she says to me, Judge, what do you think? And I said, I don't know. What do you think? She said, why don't you get your friend the judge down here to taste the pasta? Not to talk about the First Amendment or due process, but to taste the pasta and see if this chef is any good. So I'm going to ask you if you will come to dinner, a pasta dinner at the White House, just Melania, you and me. I said, well, yes, I'd be honored to, Mr. President. At that point, I drive under a bridge and the call dies. And I thought, all right, I'm out of this. But oh, no. 2 minutes later, there's those 10 zeros on the screen. So, where the hell are you? So, well, I'm in New Jersey, where thanks to your buddy Christie, the infrastructure stinks. So, all right. I get more drop calls from New Jersey than anywhere else. But look, here's the real reason I'm calling you. How's your new friend Bernie? The long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its maximum hour of danger. That was JFK in his 1961 inaugural address. It is profoundly true today. This is the hour of danger. The young people here are that generation. We can make fun of the government and we can laugh at its excesses, but this business of destroying human freedom is real. Shortly before he died, in one of his famous letters to John Adams, Jefferson predicted in the long run, government will grow and liberty will shrink. We are well past that long run. I expect that when I die, I will have the privilege of dying in my bed, in my home, surrounded by those who love me, faithful to first principles. But not all the young people here today will have that privilege. Some of you will die faithful to first principles in a government jail. And some of you will die faithful to first principles in a government town square to the sound of the government's trumpets blaring. When the time comes to make these awful decisions, you will know what to do, because freedom lies in the human heart. And when it is there, no dictator, no army, no majority in Congress can take it away. But it must do more than just lie there. Thank you, and God bless you.